This is the European edition of Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. We bring you the European unicorns, startups, founders, regulators, and leaders innovating the rapidly evolving fintech scene today. A truly localized podcast with both English and local language content, with some of the world's most well-known hosts and influencers in the fintech sector globally. Join us every week as we explore what makes the European Union a phenomenal proving ground for many of the fastest growing fintech plays in the world today. Okay, let's roll.
Hello, good afternoon here in London, and we are here for the recording of the 47th edition of Breaking Banks Europe, our popular fintech podcast. And with me, I have Harry Keane, not to be confused with the soccer star, but a star in his own right. Hi, Harry. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hey there, Harry Keane here. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hazy. We're a synthetic data company. And so we help companies make their data more private, more secure, so they can share it more easily, collaborate with third parties more easily, and ultimately innovate faster with their data.
Awesome. And with me, I also have Professor Paolo Balboni. Professor Balboni, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm professor of privacy, cybersecurity, and IT contract law at the European Center on Privacy and Security of Maastricht University. And for a living, I'm also a business lawyer specialized on those matters.
Yeah, just to make a living. And,
yeah, of course.
My dad was a teacher all his life, so I kind of relate to that. Anyway, so and this, today we have a very, very important topic on our hands, which is AI and cybersecurity. So, both of our guests have a really interesting background in privacy, but we would also like to talk a little bit more about the cybersecurity aspects. My background is in technology, and and being in crypto, all the talk about hacking and whatnot. But I think today we'll also try and bring out the technical as well as legal perspectives with a bit of a reflection and projection onto the fintech space. All right, so let's get started. AI and cybersecurity. I mean, isn't AI supposed to help with cybersecurity? I mean, Harry, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, absolutely. There's loads of ways that AI can help out with cybersecurity, particularly in the types of organizations we work with. There's a multitude of new attack vectors that these businesses are trying to defend against, and they're coming in at a volume that is just totally unprecedented, sort of never before seen. So I think, absolutely, if the attackers are using these automated systems, these AI systems to get around some of the security measures, then I think there's, you're sort of fighting fire with fire in a sense. So I think AI does have a place in the world of cybersecurity for on the offensive side for some of these organizations. Absolutely.
Awesome. And Professor Paolo, what are your thoughts?
Is
AI more of a threat or is it more of a defense?
I think equally, depending on the side you are playing this game. Usually in cybersecurity, you can distinguish between offensive AI, which is used, as mentioned before, in order to perform a very powerful attack, actually multiplying the power of an attack through the use of intelligence. On the other side, you can also think about defensive use of AI in order to improve your cybersecurity defense and detect, patterns and try to have your defenses learning on that kind of patterns and developing better defensive system based on experience. So the machine learning part of it. Actually, I think there is an additional dimension, which is also AI as a target for cybersecurity. So the massive deployment of AI, especially in sectors like banking, the fintech sector in general, but also think about the automotive sector, may particularly AI in itself a target for cyber attack in order to perform fraud and so on and so forth. So I think there is this three-dimensional way to see the relationship between AI and cybersecurity.
That's really interesting. So thanks for bringing that out, right? What are the recent incidents, right? So in the abstract, it sounds big, woolly, and scary. What are the recent incidents in the last year or so, or 2 years, where you have seen an application of artificial intelligence or machine learning techniques in sort of hacking or in defending against cyber attacks?
Well,
in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a few to mention a few of them. Very recently, in July this year, one of the U.S. fintech giants was, admittedly reporting a data breach caused by a third-party supplier. This is also interesting because in the whole fintech domain, you see reliance on different suppliers, and therefore you need to secure the whole value chain. This actually result in the publication of details on the dark web, and including passwords. And this fintech giant replied that the data that were on the dark web, they were hashed.
Can we get the name of this wonderful company?
Well, I'm sure I'm allowed to say that, but
right.
I mean, I'm sure you can find the names online. There has been also incident reported for AI companies in itself, especially mid-August. There was a fairly big data breach that exposed again a significant number of personal data on the internet, freely available on the internet. Simply because that AI company was actually performing some activities directly online before bringing them to their own servers and therefore exposing that data
But was AI, did they actually use machine learning techniques? I mean, I'm in crypto, right? And in my sector, if things get hacked, that's usually not because somebody was using artificial, because somebody was applying natural stupidity. It's just dumb stuff, insider threats and stuff that gets us hacked. Yeah. So in the examples you're citing, has there been any real application of machine learning techniques or AI?
Well, I think it's interesting your point of view, in the sense that if you look at those breaches and also other fundamental breaches that has happened also recently in Italy for a big bank, and 2014 another massive breach for a large bank in the US. At the end of the day, these are not directly related to the deployment of artificial intelligence. It's more that trivial mistakes. So sometimes they are like, systems that have not been patched, or the human error especially, and so on and so forth. But that was just to give you a little bit of recent examples of breaches in the fintech domain or AI related domain. But I agree with you. It's not about AI in this specific point, let's say, but it's more about failure of security behavior.
Harry,
have you seen AI applied to hack things?
Well, I was actually just keen to back up Paolo's point there. It's the organizations we work with are trying to deprivate with the new advanced techniques, from machine learning all the way through to even deep learning techniques, and it's data hungry algorithms, and often it's the type of processing power that you need to train them is necessarily based on premise, so it's really difficult to get that. So they have to start exposing their data to cloud environments to actually ultimately train these, whether it's a fraud detection algorithm, whether it's a customer segmentation system, transaction classification, something like that. These are all algorithms that need training on their raw data, of course, unless they're using synthetic, but that's a different story. But the point being is that they're fundamentally having to put themselves more and more at risk just by the very usage of these technologies within their organization. So I actually think I completely agree with Paolo on that. I think that is actually, certainly that's from what we see in the industry, that is actually one of the biggest problems that these big organizations have.
So let's take some hypothetical examples, right? Let's say I buy a Tesla, and Tesla allows me to sleep in the car for a few minutes. I've never done that, by the way, while the car drives itself. So now, this is a very nice application of artificial intelligence to help people rest. Now, I mean, how do you hack something like this in theory, right? And I mean, so Tesla has automation, and that's beautiful. But how do you hack into something like that? How do you hack this AI?
I think perhaps there's one element of this, which again, you could probably put more down to sort of human error, but it's that sort of certainty and safety around the training data that these automated tools are based on, right? Because it's this that age-old adage, garbage in, garbage out. So this may not be necessarily a direct, so to speak, but ultimately, if there's a hole in your training data, and I'm coming up with a terrible example here, but
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. So what they did with Tesla cars for a bit is, they laid these shiny objects on the road, and that completely, I think, made the was it Tesla or Google's cars, but those shiny things on the road essentially made the
mess up the
lane recognition system misfire.
Yeah, they try to mess up with the artificial intelligence.
I know. So you mess with so you kind of use outer sample data and you hack around. So you essentially, can hack into the brain built using some training data. Okay, that's very interesting. Now, here is the good news, right? So in financial services, we are so far behind in terms of applications of AI, and that's my view. And I'm probably going to offend some people when I say that the risk for us is much lower than the risk for, let's say, Google or Facebook or some of these massive data companies that have a lot of data and therefore a lot of artificial intelligence applications. So, I mean, both of you come from a privacy background, and in Europe we tend to worry a lot more about privacy. Maybe it's just my perception in, let's say, China or the US. So, have you seen any genuine use cases or applications where you have which make us believe that AI or machine learning techniques are a threat to our data privacy at all?
Well, I mean, everybody knows the Cambridge Analytica case, right? Where you see immediately that technology, and machine learning technology that was actually created for good purposes has been actually used for, essentially manipulating the decisions, political decisions of citizens, and therefore manipulating political campaign and undermining, the democratic status. I think that's a very well-known example, and there are not just like privacy concern there, and privacy concern may be applied to the purposes for which the personal data have been processed in that specific case, going beyond the purposes for which data they've been collected and beyond the information given to the individuals. But here we also have fundamental questions related to ethics and AI.
Absolutely. I want to keep this discussion a little bit narrow around the AI and cybersecurity, and will include privacy, data privacy in that. Now, you're talking about hacking entire societies, right? So hacking the behavior of entire millions of people at a time, and that's just incredible. And yes, that definitely involves AI techniques, and that's not something you could have done without big data, without artificial intelligence techniques a few years ago.
Yeah, you can also think maybe like even if you think like all RTB and smart contracts in order to allocate advertisements to end users. This is done by AI, very fast calculations of behavior of users online. But you can also vehicle information instead of commercials and influence the freedom of movement and of speech and to self-determine yourself in a democratic society. So what I'm saying is it's security in general as a secure society is at stake when we have a massive deployment of AI, and as Harry before, this massive deployment has been performed in no time without proper trainings, without proper data protection impact assessment or security risk assessment,
Yeah.
especially at the time of COVID-19.
Yeah, and then there's this TV series on Netflix that I really enjoyed, Social Dilemma.
So good.
And I think everybody in our audience should watch it. And it really talks about how the techniques that were developed at Facebook and at Google are being applied to essentially to change our behavior. And what's really cool about this is AI is essentially not just hacking computers, it's actually hacking us. It's actually hacking into my brain and controlling my behavior. So Harry, I mean, how do we defend ourselves? I mean, what are you doing in terms of? So we'll go into law and regulation, but being an engineer, I like to have a little bit less faith in. Sorry, Dr. Balboni, in law and regulation, and a little bit more faith in technology. So how do we defend ourselves?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I have to say I'm not certain the solution lies in technology. I have to be honest. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, no, I think there's a very natural reaction. I'm an engineer by background as well myself, so it's a very natural reaction to try and solve a problem with technology. But I think Pat is right. It's this kind of concept of privacy has just been totally eroded from our kind of just social psyche over the last 10 to 15 years, as things like Facebook and these social media platforms have just learned so much about us. They can predict what we want before we even know we think we want it, and it's just it's a scary concept. But
it's a scary reality.
For me, I think the solution is human. I do believe it takes a first step. You've got to recognize in yourself that, look, I can detach myself from the platforms, and I understand that their whole business model is around capturing my attention for as long as possible. And for some people, I think it's a snap wake up moment. It certainly was for me. I deleted my Facebook several years ago now, and it was after I remember I found rolled through just continually scrolling for about 2 hours one evening, and I was just I looked at myself and said, "Wow, this has got to stop. This is like
here is an idea. Here is a really evil idea that just came into my mind. And if I had to hack into a bank, and not that that's something I ever planned to do. I mean, I'm kind of old for this. If I ever had to hack into a bank, I wouldn't necessarily attack the ports and the network. I would actually try to build an AI which does what Facebook does. I would actually engineer the employees through an app, right? I would do what Cambridge Analytica did, and I would actually engineer the behavior of humans that work for a bank.
Yeah, potentially. I think
that seems a lot easier.
It's maybe you can perform multiple attacks, like on 2 points. One is directly on the system, and the other one is social engineering. But
right.
I think is also bringing a lot of challenges in terms of potentiating social engineer attacks and try to manipulate people and influence their behavior. I think this is really the situation that we are facing now. And if I may also to chip in on the previous discussion, I think the solution, I have to say, Harry, I'm a little bit more skeptical than you in the fact that the individuals, the people can really defend themselves. I tend
to... I mean, when the president of the United States is tweeting once every 5 seconds this morning, I mean, sorry, go ahead. I mean, who are we? Who's going to protect the country?
That's another attack, right? But no,
you hacked the president. Sorry, keep going.
No, what I was suggesting is that I don't believe that legislation will really provide a convincing way to protect the society. On the other side, I don't think that citizens can really protect themselves. I think we are empowering a lot companies, great corporation and technology companies. And with great power comes great responsibility, I think. For also in my line of research, I'm developing this concept of data protection and security as a corporate responsibility. It's a way, if you are active, if you are making money, if you are really able to, influence the market, you need to put in place socially responsible behavior. And by socially responsible behavior, you have two things. One thing is about socially responsible in terms of ethics. So making sure that the algorithm that you deploy will not have, unfair results. On the other side, security, cybersecurity, that the components you use and the suppliers you use, they are, secure in terms of measures to prevent hacking the algorithm and so on and so forth. So I believe more in a socially responsible operation.
Yeah, so I have I used to work for Goldman back in 2010, and we were as dominant as the Silicon Valley is now, right? So Wall Street was the dominant industry, and regulation was light touch, and we were doing God's work. If you heard Lloyd Blankfein in the day, and now if you go to if you go follow some of the Facebook folks on Twitter, they think they're doing God's work too, and they mean they're actually helping users connect, helping people be lonely and connect to their families around the world and whatnot, and they genuinely believe it, and there is some truth to that, right? Now, they are they're a company with a profit motive. It's their job, more money for their shareholders. So, I mean, if we expect Facebook to self-regulate and really govern their own behavior instead of seeking the maximum profit by building addictive products, I think that system is going to fail, right? So, and eventually Wall Street had to be regulated, and maybe Facebook will have to be regulated as well. Now, but let's move away from that for a second, right? So yes, absolutely, law and regulation are components of the overall solution to the AI and cybersecurity problem. But what's the European perspective on this? Because we came up with GDPR a few years ago. Has GDPR really worked? I mean, has it really defended the rights of European citizens or European businesses against this onslaught of advanced analytics on our security and on our privacy? And if yes, then what's the evidence?
Yeah, I think GDPR is just one part of the story, because this part of the story is more regulated by the e-privacy directive and potentially in the future the EU regulation. So we are just half of the reform. The GDPR, I think, has extended a solid basis for the protection of privacy, also enhancing fines and also giving a bit more flexibility to innovative business in order to regulate the level of compliance, their compliance posture. In all, I think it's a good product. We missed the second part of the reform, which is going to be very much on tracking technologies. By tracking technologies, you all start performing machine learning analysis and therefore applying artificial intelligence, and then all the monetization of personal data. So I think we need to be very, very cautious that this is the right time where now there are the nations around the EU regulation. That is the chance to try to get it right and to complement GDPR, which is just a baseline, with additional steps. GDPR by itself already has shown that it falls short on artificial intelligence, because you can make artificial intelligence legal but still have unwanted effects.
And it's just, sorry, Harry, I'll just invite you to talk about what you're doing and as an engineer to sort of help the cause of cybersecurity and see. But what I think is amusing about what you just said, Professor Balboni, is if we make some rules and those rules don't work, then we make more rules.
Oh, sorry.
An effective rule is more rule making.
I think it's more that it is a reform, and to be completed, we missed the second half. So even before, there was the Directive 95/46, was the General Directive on Privacy and the e-Privacy Directive. Now we have half of the reform with the general part, General Data Protection Regulation. We missed the second half. I think all in all, I mean, the GDPR has proven fairly flexible and acceptable in terms of compliance for businesses, and still, keep innovating. But there is this, more technical components, and AI is surely part of it, that still needs to be, more regulated in terms of specifying which are the rules of engagement. On the other side, you see immediately that the Commission, especially, is looking at regulation, not just from the legal point of view, but also from the ethical perspective. And surely law is not enough, and we need to develop this, ethical.
Agreed. So Harry, what are you doing on the ground to sort of improve our cyber defenses and privacy defenses?
Well, if I may, it's just I do think it's interesting on that GDPR point. I wouldn't mind sharing my perspective as well. I think there's one thing that didn't quite touch on there was, it's just the GDPR, if there has been one success that I think is quite interesting, is maybe a slight side effect in a way, is that suddenly, people understand a little bit more about data privacy. You know, the average person on the street.
It's definitely been educational.
Yeah, it's huge educational. It's
sure.
like
Hugely educational.
You have to, every time you log onto a website, if it's on your new browser, new device, you have to.
And also for European corporations, the awareness of customers' data and the value of that data.
Exactly. Yeah. Everyone works at a company that's had to go through a GDPR audit, right? If whatever company you are.
Yes, and it's been great for auditors.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely great for auditors and lawyers, and that's not a snark. Let's keep going.
Yeah, exactly. I think, it's in the same way that, we suddenly got across Europe sort of warnings on cigarette packets. It's the same sort of case. You get a banner every time.
Smoking. Yeah, that's right. So so what are you actually building, Harry, in terms of technology that really helps us beef up our cyber and privacy defenses?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, what we see is that things like GDPR are fantastic, but actually, in some ways, it even holds back some companies that do really want to do well with have well-meaning intentions with their data, i.e., they're a bank trying to build a better fraud detection system, but the additional layer of regulation and compliance, etc., is another thing that they have to comply to, which is absolutely has to be in place. But they are tricky things to get around when you're trying to improve user experience using some of these more advanced techniques around that are based off training on your data sets. So we saw this problem. Come up in a number of different areas, and it's this kind of ability to share data safely, securely, and have the control over the level of privacy of the individuals in that data set. So you as a company can say, I am going to collaborate perhaps with this third party because I have ethical, good intentions with this data set, but I'm going to do it in such a way that is safe, secure, and private. So what we've built is a synthetic data tool, which effectively scans a raw data set for all of the underlying trends, patterns, and correlations. It captures it all in an AI model. It could be a variety of different models. It could be a GAN. I'm sure you've seen some of the crazy images online or websites online where you can generate a celebrity's face or something like that. So that's exactly the same. That is exactly the same process that we've implemented as well. But working with businesses' data to sort of produce this lifelike replica any of the real information that they can ultimately share. I think you're on mute. Sorry, I don't know if you're trying to.
So what does that mean for me as a consumer? That you can use my healthcare data without actually looking at the data and do a bunch of analytics on it?
So healthcare. Well, I mean, we do more work with banks. So you as a user of a current account or something, you will have a profile that a bank may be interested in analyzing to see whether you might be vulnerable and about to maybe go into overdrafts. And so if they had enough data, they might be able to intervene earlier and say, well, look, you might want to put in these different measures in place to help you with your financial stability. So it's that level of insight which you can't just you need that really representative data to work from if you're going to try and build those and methodologies. But as I say, it's very risky to use the real data in those situations for all of the different reasons we discussed earlier.
Yeah, definitely. So, Professor Balboni, what's the EU perspective on AI and cybersecurity? So what do the officials talk about?
Well, I think there is a very interesting correlation that the European Union is making, and is putting together innovation and trust. So innovation is good as long as European citizens will trust innovation. If innovation is not secure, and will, for example, expose individuals to cyber attacks, resulting in financial loss or defamation, and so on and so forth, then innovation will not be sustainable within the European Union. So they are making this correlation in a very interesting way by saying cybersecurity is absolutely necessary for innovation to be trusted. And I think this link is a very important link for Europe. And Europe is now developing all sorts of policies and strategies and even certification around that. But it's very important that positioning cybersecurity element for trust and trust is necessary to adopt innovation by European citizens.
One thing that amazes me about GDPR and some of the subsequent rulemaking is that as citizens, it's a complex topic, right? We don't really have a lot of defenses against the governments. And if you go back into the European history for 7 or 8 decades, then it's not necessarily corporations that the citizens' privacy and security has been threatened by. It's also been the governments. So all of our rulemaking essentially exempts governments from the restrictions that are applied to corporations. That's required for national security purposes. Sure, you don't want the same privacy rights to be conferred upon, let's say, terrorists and so on. But then there is a very thin line between real enemies of the state and political dissidents and so on. So what's the European perspective on cybersecurity of citizens against their own governments or?
Well, I think that debate has been mounting in the past months, and now it's even before with the GDPR also applies to public administrations, and then you have a specific directive, which is the police directive, that grant more rights and to law enforcement, and these together they form this package of general data protection regulation and the directive on police enforcement. But I think there is now a lot of debate and a lot of tables at the European level where experts are invited in order to revise all different mechanisms and tools in order to make sure that the interference of law enforcement is actually proportionate in our democratic society. You see this whole debate really exploding around the Schrems II decision of the Court of Justice of the European Union, that invalidated the privacy shield because of the FISA, because of the interference of the US law enforcement on European citizens' data. And you see this debate coming here now, of course, because it's a geopolitical game, this one. And
it's totally a trade and
exactly.
issue. Yeah. So one thing I really, so you and I were discussing this topic last week, and one of the things that I really liked about what you said, and you didn't say it that directly, is that we have our data is also threatened by AI companies themselves, right? Because AI company, you didn't say, I'm reading your examples, and you talked about over 2.5 million medical records related to car accidents, and includes names, insurance records, medical diagnosis notes, and payment records on July 7th, blah, blah, blah. Point being, AI companies are so data hungry, like Clear.ai and so on, that in fact have to worry about AI companies as a potential source of threat. Do you see any rulemaking in that direction?
Well, yeah, absolutely. There is a great attention to AI, and there has been already policy papers and studies and at the European Union level. I think AI companies are just a portion of this environment that embraces AI. So they are just providers of that technology. But you see, also when we look at the whole fintech sector, the fintech sector is about technology for financial services.
Yeah, how do we get ahead? Yeah. So competitive advantage is your data, is your technology, is your analytics.
It's all about the data-driven economy, and data-driven technology is necessary for a data-driven economy. So I wouldn't crucify AI companies, but I would make...
I work for one, so... I would never crucify ourselves, right?
Yeah, but I would actually make AI companies providing services in a specific sector like the fintech sector subject to some sort of certification or very high standards in terms of cybersecurity that I think is very important and already partially regulated in the EU proposed cybersecurity certification framework.
So I have a fundamental issue here, right? So in Europe we can make a lot of rules, but it's who is to say that the companies in Iran or the companies in Russia, there's a company is necessarily something with a building, right? These days, a company is 5 people with a cloud subscription. right? And those 5 people might live in 5 different countries. So how do you can make all sorts of rules for companies incorporated in Europe. How do we defend our data and systems from companies that aren't governed by EU rules?
Well, I think, from the legal perspective, you can have some extraterritorial effects of legal sources like the GDPR. This extraterritorial effect, it applies also to companies established outside the European Union that monitor the behavior of European citizens or offer product and services to Europe. You can make the same thing, for product and services provided or sold by companies outside the European Union in Europe. But the real point is enforcement. So you can write the perfect law, but if you don't have MLAT, so this multilateral agreement for the enforcement of that is nothing.
So this is where the Americans have the huge advantage, right? Because there is always extraterritorial enforcement by, let's say, AML regulators and whatnot, and there's all this mirror backing the geopolitics and the trade. So, which makes it a very, very complex topic. But, tone it down a little bit. So as a citizen, right, let's say I'm a layperson. I don't know what a GAN is or, what a convolutional neural network is. What do I need to be aware of, Harry, to protect my data, my technology, my computers and my bank account from AI, the threat posed by new AI algorithms?
Yeah, well, it's worth separating, I think, cyber attacks to AI, because there's also cyber cleanliness advice. It's very straightforward, whatever, not using the same password, all that sort of stuff. But in protecting against AI, I just really think that it's such a, for those that aren't in the world and understand the sort of true power of it, it's really got to start with an educational piece. We are that early on in the understanding. I think really just if we can somehow communicate, and this is one of the things that Social Dilemma I think does quite well. It sort of it communicates the story and the the intentions and the motivations of some of these big companies in using these types of tools and technologies. I think then you can understand and start to question yourself about, right, well, look, should I be spending so much time on an application? Am I happy with them having this kind of information understanding about this? It really should start with a fundamental question, and it's as Paolo was saying, it's not an easy societal sort of awakening to go through. But that for me is if you or I, that's the single bit of advice I'd say. It's just be aware about ultimately what is what your sort of data footprint is, and start to think of the possibilities how that might be used, and educate yourself around that, because that's the only way you can really understand.
And how do we educate ourselves? I mean, do we all have to read Kevin Mitnick's hacker books or on the internet?
It's difficult. This is sometimes it's complicated stuff. So this is coming back to the Social Dilemma. That's the most immediate example I've got. But it's as this stuff becomes more of a more popular culture, then that is just the different forms of media are that'll start permeating through. But it's difficult. It's difficult to explain. I think it should become more part of a conversation. It's that's absolutely how it should.
So Professor Balboni, over to you. Are there good resources
I think
a layperson can use?
I think first of all, I would like to state that I think cybersecurity literacy, it should be a right for new generations, because if you grow up in this digital ecosystem without understanding the basic of cybersecurity, you are just condemned to a very, very bad.
It's like living in society, pre computers and not having the right of physical security. How is it any different, right? So your assets are not secure, your mind is not secure, your relationships are not secure. So absolutely.
And you will not even be able to freely develop yourself, because
you can't even control your own behavior.
Exactly.
You can get hacked as a person. That's right.
And on the other side,
no.
And on the other side, I think it's also fair enough to say that the European Union is already funding projects for communicating in an easier and understandable way cyber under the Horizon 2020 calls. One thing that is very interesting is the gamification of cybersecurity. And I think this is really what we need. It's absolutely impossible to think about that people will read books on that. The average person will read book on that. It will also be absolutely impossible to think about people staying behind the screen for 1 hour looking at a cybersecurity presentation, because this is not anymore how the information.
No.
Information is quick, is fun, is a game.
That's right.
Unless
it has to be like Twitter, right?
Exactly.
Bite-size, easy to consume.
Yeah. It can be a movie. It can be a series, like you mentioned on Netflix, or a game.
Sure. Like TikTok,
kind of things.
Right?
Yeah. You can engage. You can have social engagement around cybersecurity. You need to make it cool to some extent.
I really like that. Yeah.
I think can I add there as well? No, I just think it's interesting that sort of gamification, because I think the education of this should be, should start really early as we teach our kids about personal safety and security. Whether it not talking to strangers or like
my 10-year-old keeps hacking my password. So sure.
Yeah, exactly. Not to click on email attachments that you don't recognize, sort of stuff. This is all part of our digital literacy and it's a different mode. We haven't.
I really like that. I think that digital literacy is critical to our competitiveness as countries and continents, right? If the citizens are aware of what they can do in this society, and then cybersecurity has to be a fundamental part of it. And especially in the AI generation, if you're not doing that, then we leave our entire societies to the risk of manipulation by, who knows, profit seekers, or by foreign agents who want our elections to go in a certain direction. I'm not saying that's where American elections went, but who knows, right? So that's a really interesting perspective, and I hadn't thought about so many different dimensions, because as an engineer, you tend to think of AI and cybersecurity as a topic that only relates to algorithms and hacking, and then having defense and monitoring software and so on. But I think I really hadn't thought about the regulation, legal, all of these, the societal and ethical dimensions of this, and also trade and geopolitics dimensions of this fascinating topic. So now, because we are in fintech and we are a fintech podcast, so I have to ask, as banks doing, what are fintech firms doing in your knowledge, right? And Professor Balboni, I know you don't like to name clients or potential clients, but what are they actually doing to defend my money and my data and their own systems?
It's difficult to generalize, because I think you really see different approaches to cybersecurity with respect to different banks and financial institutions or companies active in the fintech. Well, I think it's interesting to see what happened with the PSD2. That was, the liberation of data, and that created a lot of new forms of banking and newcomers and so on and so forth. And all of them, they have something in common. They massively use technology, and they of course support their operation increasingly more with artificial intelligence. The thing is, all of this happened in a very traditional sector, where banks were urged to catch up competition. And therefore, how long it is to make a decision in a bank, right? And if you think about deploying more and more technology at a faster pace with respect to all the checks and balances and controls of this regulated system, which is the banking system, immediately you realize that you end up in two ways. Either you lag behind in competition, or you take decisions without respecting all the steps, leading to an insecure environment. So I think we found banks at the moment found themselves in this situation where they are struggling in this sort of tension between fully embracing technologies and try to compete with the old fintech industry, and on the other side, obey to a massively regulated sector, and they are to some extent slave of their very slow decision making pace. And I think that's very objectively the situation at the moment.
So I guess we don't need to just educate the individual citizens. There is probably time to educate an entire industry on both in cybersecurity and the internet. And that industry happens to be financial services.
Yeah, but even think about when we talk about banks, we tend to talk about large institutions with a lot of employees, and those employees most of the time they've been trained to do repetitively tasks, very segmented tasks.
Yes, please don't remind me.
Yeah, and then all in a sudden they are requested, to jump into this technology revolution in the banking sector.
It's an intergenerational change, and
very much,
a lot of
the
staff and employees and entire organizational cultures aren't quite ready for what's actually already happened, right?
And that,
so now, Harry, any last? Sorry, go ahead.
No, just to say, and that makes the banking system weak in terms of the human factor being the weakest link of security, because they need first to properly train a lot of work.
Absolutely. And Harry, any last thoughts on the topic before I start writing my program to AI for social engineering?
Yeah, we should put you on a watch list, maybe. I think from my perspective, we do a lot of work with banks, and actually the reason that our technology is interesting to them is because banks are built on trust with their customer. It's one of the it is fundamentally one of the only interesting. A retailer doesn't have to have the same amount of trust as a bank has to have with their customer. Absolutely. So actually, what we found is that the banks are really they're really careful with their data, and actually that's part of the reason why they, the more established organizations out there are looking for ways that they can innovate whilst respecting this like high standard of privacy that they have. And that's absolutely what they've got to do, because they are dealing with our most sensitive information. And it's not only just can someone drain my bank account, it's also your spending profile is so specific to you, and it tells you so much about you. So exactly. It's just every single behavior about them. It's you think Facebook has a lot of information about.
It doesn't really matter what I say about my political beliefs if I just sent a big check to the Democratic Party, right?
Exactly.
I might say I'm a Republican, but the next thing I know, I just donated to Nancy Pelosi, and that tells everything about me. So absolutely, your money says a lot about you than your Facebook profile. So that is really sensitive data.
So super sensitive. Yeah, exactly. And so my parting thought is that yes, banks are they're quite at this already. So I've certainly been impressed with what I've seen. They say this definitely stifles their ability to innovate, and which, as Paolo was saying, is a potential weakness for themselves as well.
I hate to close it with a snark, but here's the good news about banks. Most of the times, we don't even know where the customer data is, so nobody else will know anyways. Okay, so no more snark from me, but banks do have a data fragmentation problem, but we do manage our firewalls really, really well, and some of our technology is not so current, which helps, right? So sometimes too much automation and being really current on the bleeding edge doesn't necessarily provide the most security, and most of the technology, and especially large banks, is generally quite robust and stable and has been around and been battle tested on the internet a long time. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know, right? It does not help with the extreme. It does help with security. Now, I think what we really there are a few things we're taking away from this really, really useful and interesting discussion. And that is really education, not just for but also for enterprise, and this whole need for awareness through bite-sized digital media and some of the same techniques that I think have been used in the past by Silicon Valley and Cambridge Analytica to manipulate our behavior. They can also be used to change behavior for the better. Well, thank you so much, Harry and Paolo and Mr. Balboni. Thank you so much for joining our podcast.
Thank you.
This was a really useful discussion, and I'll be less skeptical next time. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Bye. Good
All the best.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Banks Europe, a Provoke Media podcast in cooperation with FinTech Stage. Don't forget to tweet us out, shout out, or post to the team at Breaking Banks EU on Twitter. If there's something or someone you'd like to hear on our cast, let us know. See you next week on Breaking Banks Europe.